"Ma'am, the staff elevator is downstairs." The words landed softly, politely even, but the humiliation behind them hit harder than a slammed door. Naomi Carter stopped walking. For one strange second, the entire marble lobby seemed to tilt around her. The chandelier above the 20-story atrium scattered pale gold light across the polished floor while executives in tailored navy suits moved past her pretending not to stare. The security guard at the velvet rope shifted awkwardly beneath her silence. His badge read Richard. Mid-50s. Nervous eyes. Already regretting what he'd said. Naomi looked down at herself once, almost instinctively. Charcoal Tom Ford suit. Black leather heels. Diamond stud earrings so subtle they whispered money instead of announcing it. In her left hand sat a slim leather portfolio embossed with the silver logo of Whitmore and Vale Holdings, the company she had spent 11 years helping build from the edge of collapse into a multi-billion-dollar empire. Yet somehow this morning, standing beneath the cold glow of corporate lighting and giant LED screens welcoming investors to the CEO appointment gala, she looked invisible. Or worse, misplaced. "I'm Naomi Carter," she said calmly. "I know who you are, ma'am." Richard swallowed hard. "But they told me all support staff needed to use the lower entrance today." Support staff. The phrase hung there between them like stale smoke. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around the portfolio. Behind the guard, two young analysts exchanged a quick glance before looking away too fast. One of them lowered his eyes toward the marble floor, embarrassed for her but unwilling to intervene. Naomi had seen that look her entire career. Sympathy without courage. Above the lobby entrance, a massive digital banner rotated slowly across the giant LED wall. "Congratulations to our new CEO, Ethan Whitmore." Applause thundered faintly from the ballroom upstairs. Naomi heard it through the ceiling speakers along with the muffled echo of a man laughing into a microphone. Ethan. Of course Ethan was already speaking. Her stomach hollowed slightly. Not from surprise. From confirmation. Last night she had still been scheduled to deliver the opening shareholder address herself. Her speech notes were sitting in the leather folder tucked beneath her arm right now, untouched. Every projection in that presentation had been her work. Every restructuring plan. Every acquisition strategy. Every painful late-night decision that kept the company alive during the recession 3 years ago, when half the board wanted to gut payroll and abandon regional branches. Naomi remembered sleeping on the office couch for nearly 2 weeks back then, surviving on burnt coffee and vending machine pretzels while rain hammered the windows of the old Manhattan headquarters. Nobody applauded those nights. Nobody photographed them for Forbes magazine covers. Upstairs, another wave of applause erupted. Louder this time. Naomi slowly lifted her eyes toward the ceiling. The sound traveled through steel beams and glass like something alive. Ethan was being celebrated with her blueprint. Richard shifted his weight again. "Mom. I'm just following instructions." Naomi looked back at him. He wasn't cruel. That almost made it worse. Cruelty was easy to fight. This was cleaner than cruelty. Corporate. Sanitized. Smoothed over with polite smiles and carefully chosen language. A woman in a cream-colored designer dress brushed past Naomi carrying a champagne flute. She glanced at Naomi's face, then toward the security rope, and immediately assumed what role Naomi belonged to. "Excuse me," the woman said casually, holding out her empty glass. "Can someone take this?" Naomi stared at the glass for half a heartbeat, then at the woman. The woman finally noticed the silence. Noticed the suit, the posture, the eyes. Her smile faltered instantly. "Oh." She pulled the glass back awkwardly. "I'm sorry, I thought you were." "I know what you thought," Naomi replied quietly. The woman flushed crimson and hurried away into the crowd. Somewhere above them, the ballroom doors opened briefly and Ethan Whitmore's voice rolled through the speakers warm, polished, confident. "Leadership," he said, "is about vision." Naomi closed her eyes for one slow breath. Because the cruelest part wasn't that he stole her seat. It was that half. The room upstairs probably believed he belonged in it more than she ever could. Naomi stepped away from the velvet rope before the silence around her could harden into spectacle. Her heels moved softly across the marble floor, steady and measured, but inside her chest her heartbeat felt uneven, almost mechanical, like an engine running too hot beneath polished steel. The elevator bay stood just beyond the lobby cafe where junior associates clustered around tiny espresso cups pretending to network while secretly watching the drama unfold through reflections in the glass walls. Nobody stopped her. Nobody apologized. The elevator door slid open with a muted chime, and cool air brushed against her skin as she stepped inside alone. Floor 27. Executive ballroom level. The doors closed slowly, sealing her inside mirrored steel and pale overhead lighting. For the first time all morning, Naomi allowed herself to exhale. Her reflection stared back at her from 3 different angles. Calm face, straight posture, controlled breathing. Nobody looking at her now would have guessed she had not slept more than 3 hours in the past 2 nights. Her phone vibrated softly in her purse. Olivia. Naomi stared at the screen for a second before answering. Hey baby. Her daughter's voice came through warm and half awake. Mom, did it happen yet? Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Outside the elevator, numbers climbed one by one toward the ballroom floor. 23. 24. Not exactly, she said carefully. Olivia went quiet. She knew that tone. What did they do? Naomi leaned lightly against the brushed steel wall. Nothing I cannot handle. Mom. The elevator hummed softly around her. Somewhere above, applause echoed faintly through the building again. Naomi swallowed once. They changed the announcement. Silence. Then Olivia's voice lowered. They gave it to Ethan. Naomi did not answer immediately, and that silence answered enough. That is insane, Olivia whispered. Everybody knows you built that company. Naomi looked down at the silver buttons glowing beside her reflection. Knowing something and saying it out loud are not always the same thing. The elevator dinged softly at floor 27. Before the doors opened, Olivia spoke again. You always told me hard work mattered more than politics. Naomi's throat tightened slightly at that. I said it should. The doors slid apart. Noise flooded in instantly. Crystal glasses clinking. Expensive laughter. Low jazz drifting through hidden ceiling speakers. Naomi stepped into the hallway outside the grand ballroom where giant framed photographs displayed Whitmore and Vale's rise over the last decade. In nearly every photo, Ethan stood front and center smiling confidently beside politicians, investors, and magazine editors. Naomi appeared in only 2 pictures, both near the edge of the frame. Working. Holding folders. Looking away from the camera. She ended the call gently. I will call you later. Mom. Olivia said quickly before she hung up. Do not let them make you feel small today. Naomi stared ahead at the ballroom entrance. 2 massive gold doors stood open beneath warm chandelier light, while servers in white jackets floated through the crowd balancing trays of champagne. At the far end of the room, Ethan Whitmore stood on stage beneath a 12-foot LED screen displaying his name in silver letters. He looked perfect up there. Relaxed smile. Tailored tuxedo. Easy confidence. The kind investors trusted instantly. Naomi watched him shake hands with board members who once sat in her office asking for guidance during crisis meetings at 2 in the morning. Men who had called her brilliant in private now avoided even making eye contact in public. Margaret Hale stood near the front table speaking quietly with a group of shareholders. The chairwoman wore a pearl-white suit and the expression of someone who believed difficult decisions were cleaner when delivered politely. Naomi began walking toward the ballroom entrance. One of the event coordinators noticed her immediately and froze. The young woman nearly dropped the tablet in her hands. Miss Carter, she said nervously. I did not know if you were still coming. Naomi stopped beside her. Neither did I. The coordinator swallowed awkwardly. Your seat was moved. Of course it was. Naomi accepted the new seating. Card without looking at it right away. Then finally she lowered her eyes toward the printed label. Table 38. Rear section. Staff and secondary operations. The ballroom lights shimmered softly against the cardstock, while somewhere on stage Ethan's voice rolled smoothly through the speakers again. The future of this company, he said confidently, belongs to leaders willing to evolve. Naomi's jaw tightened almost invisibly, because hidden inside her leather portfolio, beneath the speech she was never allowed to give, sat something Ethan did not know existed yet. And if she was right about what she discovered last night, this celebration upstairs was already built on a lie. The farther Naomi walked into the ballroom, the colder the air seemed to become. Not physically cold. Controlled cold. The kind created by central air vents hidden behind gold latticework and conversations polished until no real emotion survived inside them. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead like floating crowns while nearly 400 guests filled the enormous room in dark tuxedos and jewel-toned gowns. The scent of expensive perfume mixed with coffee and aged whiskey drifted through the air beneath the soft hum of investor chatter. Naomi kept moving. Slow. Composed. Untouchable on the outside. But every few steps she caught another look. Some startled. Some guilty. Some openly relieved she had not caused a scene in the lobby downstairs. Ethan Whitmore stood center stage beneath moving lights, smiling beside a massive digital timeline celebrating the company's growth. His voice carried smoothly through hidden surround speakers. "What makes a company strong is not one individual," he said confidently. "It is alignment, shared vision, unified leadership." Naomi nearly laughed at the irony of it. 3 years ago, Ethan had wanted to shut down the Midwest Logistics Division entirely during the recession. He had called it dead weight during an emergency board call, while stock prices collapsed and investors threatened lawsuits. Naomi had spent 72 straight hours rebuilding the numbers herself and restructuring the shipping contracts one state at a time. That division now generated almost 30% of the company's annual revenue. Ethan was applauding its success tonight as if he had believed in it all along. Naomi reached table 38 near the back corner of the ballroom beside the catering entrance. The placement was almost elegant in its insult. From here the stage looked distant, framed between towering flower arrangements and the shoulders of higher-ranking guests seated closer to the front. Secondary operations. Support staff. People who kept the machine running without being allowed to represent it. Naomi lowered herself into the chair quietly. A waiter approached immediately with champagne. "Still or sparkling water, ma'am?" he asked politely. "Still." The glass arrived ice-cold against her fingertips. Tiny droplets slid slowly down the crystal stem while she scanned the room carefully. Margaret Hale sat near the center platform surrounded by board members and institutional investors. Every few minutes someone leaned toward her smiling too hard, congratulating her for the smooth transition. Naomi noticed how often the phrase appeared tonight. Smooth transition. Strategic evolution. Investor confidence. Nobody used the words replacement or removal. Corporate betrayal always arrived dressed in clean language. Across the room, Daniel Brooks finally noticed her. The company's chief financial officer froze mid-conversation for half a second before lowering his eyes toward his plate. Naomi watched him carefully. Daniel had known her longer than almost anyone here. 12 years. He used to bring black coffee into her office during overnight audit sessions because he knew she forgot to eat when stressed. Now he could barely look at her. That bothered Naomi more than Ethan's speech. Because guilt only lived where truth still survived. On stage, applause erupted again as Ethan lifted a crystal award engraved with the company logo. Camera flashes burst white across the ballroom. Naomi sat motionless through all of it. Then her fingers slid quietly into the leather portfolio resting beside her chair. She pulled out a single folded document and stared at the timestamp printed across the bottom. 11:43 p.m. Last night. Internal Board Communication Archive. Unauthorized amendment request. Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly. She remembered exactly where she had found it. Near midnight she had returned to her office to retrieve Olivia's birthday card. She accidentally left behind earlier that week. Most of the executive floor had already gone dark except for the cleaning crew, and the pale blue glow from computer monitors left sleeping behind glass offices. Naomi had walked past the conference room when she heard voices inside. Ethan. Margaret. Daniel. The door had not closed completely. "Investors will never fully support her," Margaret had said quietly. "Not publicly." Naomi stopped breathing for a second, remembering it. Ethan had answered almost immediately. "Then we make the change before the announcement." Silence followed. Then another voice. Daniel's. Uneasy. Lower. "She built this company." Margaret's response came cold as winter glass. "And she should be proud of that. But perception matters." Naomi folded the paper slowly inside her lap while Ethan's speech continued overhead. Perception. Such a small word for something capable of stealing an entire future. Suddenly a shadow appeared beside her table. Naomi looked up. A young analyst stood there nervously holding a silver USB drive between trembling fingers. Maybe 24 years old. Thin tie. Sleepless eyes. "Miss Carter," he whispered carefully. "You need to see what they buried before tonight." Naomi did not take the USB drive immediately. She studied the young analyst first. His right hand trembled slightly beneath the ballroom lights while conversations in soft jazz swirled around them like nothing dangerous was happening at all. He looked terrified. Not dramatic terrified. Real terrified. The kind people carried quietly in corporate buildings where careers disappeared with one meeting and one email marked confidential. "What is your name?" Naomi asked softly. "Evan," he whispered. "Evan Mercer." Naomi nodded once. "Why are you giving this to me, Evan?" His eyes darted toward the stage where Ethan continued shaking hands with investors beneath flashing cameras. "Because what they are doing is wrong." The answer came. Too fast to be rehearsed. Naomi finally accepted the drive from his hand, her fingers brushing cold metal for barely a second. "Did anyone see you come over here?" "I do not think so." "That is not the same thing." Evan swallowed hard. "I copied the files after midnight from one of the archive servers. They deleted most of the internal discussion threads this morning, but not before backup sync completed." Naomi stared at him carefully. "You risked your job for this?" Evan let out a quiet breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "My father worked loading trucks at your Ohio distribution center for 22 years. Naomi blinked once. "When the board wanted to shut it down during the recession, you fought to keep it open." His voice lowered further. "My dad kept his pension because of you." For the first time that evening, something inside Naomi shifted slightly. Not relief. Something warmer. Human. Evan glanced toward the ballroom entrance nervously. "You should watch the files before they realize copies still exist." Then, before Naomi could answer, he stepped back into the crowd and disappeared between waiters carrying silver trays of champagne. Naomi lowered her gaze toward the USB resting in her palm. Tiny. Weightless. Yet somehow it felt heavier than the crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. On stage, Ethan finished another polished answer during the shareholder Q&A session. Laughter rippled across the ballroom after one of his jokes. Naomi watched him carefully. He looked comfortable now. Too comfortable. Like a man who believed the hardest part was already over. Her phone buzzed softly again. A calendar notification. 8:15 p.m. Executive media interviews begin. Naomi almost deleted it automatically before stopping herself. Her name still appeared on the original schedule. Some systems inside the company had clearly not updated fast enough to erase her completely. She slipped the USB carefully into her portfolio and rose from her seat. The ballroom lights reflected across the glossy black floor as she moved quietly toward the side exit beside the catering corridor. Nobody stopped her. Most guests remained focused on Ethan and the stage while giant screens displayed stock growth charts and smiling photographs from charity galas. A photographer brushed past Naomi without recognizing her at all. The hallway outside the ballroom felt instantly quieter. Dimmer. The thick carpet muted footsteps while soft recessed lights glowed along dark walnut walls lined with abstract art nobody truly looked at. Naomi walked quickly now. At the far end of the corridor sat a private executive lounge reserved for senior leadership during events. She still had access. At least for now. The electronic lock flashed green when she pressed her badge against the panel. Inside, silence wrapped around her immediately. The room smelled faintly of leather furniture and fresh coffee left warming beside the wet bar. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan glowing beneath the night sky. Thousands of tiny lights flickering through mist along the river. Naomi set the portfolio down carefully on the conference table and plugged the USB drive into her company laptop. For a second nothing happened. Then folders began appearing across the screen one after another. Audio recordings. Deleted board memos. Internal polling data from institutional investors. Naomi opened the first document slowly. Her eyes scanned line after line while the city lights reflected faintly across her face. Preferred public candidate profile. Investor confidence analysis. Executive optics evaluation. Then the phrase that made her stomach tighten cold. Recommended leadership image. Male white. Legacy traditional presentation preferred for market stability. Naomi leaned back slowly in the leather chair. The soft hum of the laptop fan filled the room. Outside the windows, rain had started falling lightly over Manhattan, turning the glass silver beneath the city lights. She opened another file. Then another. The deeper she searched, the uglier the pattern became. They had not simply replaced her. They had planned it for months. Every smile, every congratulation, every promise from the board had been theater. Naomi's fingers stilled on the keyboard when she reached the final audio file. Timestamped only 3 hours earlier. Private pre-event conversation. Participants: Margaret Hale, Ethan Whitmore, Daniel Brooks. Naomi stared at the play button without breathing. Then slowly she clicked it, and Margaret Hale's voice filled the dark room like a blade sliding quietly across glass. "We cannot afford to make this company look unstable." Margaret Hale's voice emerged sharp and controlled through the laptop speakers, every syllable polished by decades inside executive boardrooms. Naomi sat motionless in the leather chair as rain slid slowly down the glass windows behind her. The city beyond looked blurred now, softened by water and distance. Ethan answered next. Calm. Confident. "Naomi is respected internally." "Internally," Margaret repeated. "But this appointment is bigger than employee loyalty. Investors are nervous already." A faint sound of crystal glasses clinking echoed somewhere in the background of the recording. They had been drinking while deciding her future. Naomi's fingers curled slowly against the edge of the conference table. Daniel Brooks spoke next, quieter than the others. Uneasy. She carried this company through the recession. Silence followed for 2 long seconds before Margaret answered again. "And she will be compensated generously for her contributions." Contributions. Naomi almost laughed at the word. 11 years of 18-hour workdays reduced to a corporate noun soft enough to fit inside a press release. Ethan's voice lowered slightly. "She is going to know this was deliberate." "Only if someone tells her," Margaret replied coldly. Naomi paused the recording instantly. The room fell silent except for the low hum of the air conditioning vent overhead. She stared at the laptop screen while her reflection floated faintly across the darkened window beside it. For the first time that night, anger finally reached her. Not loud anger. Not explosive anger. Worse, quiet anger. The kind that settled deep beneath the ribs and stayed there. Naomi pushed back from the table slowly and stood. Her heels sank softly into the thick carpet as she walked toward the window overlooking Manhattan. Rain streaked silver across the glass while headlights crawled below like rivers of light moving through the city. Somewhere, down there, people were finishing late dinners, hurrying into subway stations, carrying groceries home through the weather. Entire lives unfolding beyond these towers where powerful people discussed her existence like a branding issue. Her phone buzzed softly on the conference table behind her. Daniel Brooks. Naomi stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. "Naomi." His voice sounded strained immediately, like someone carrying a weight too heavy to hide anymore. "Where are you?" "Why?" A pause. "Because Margaret is asking questions." Naomi looked toward the ballroom far below through the rain-streaked glass. "That usually means she already knows the answer." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Listen to me carefully. Whatever you think you found tonight, do not act emotionally." Naomi closed her eyes briefly at the choice of words. Emotionally. There it was again. The corporate language women like her learned to recognize instantly. Men raised their voices and became decisive. Women showed disappointment and suddenly became emotional. "You knew," she said quietly. Silence. Long enough to hurt. "Daniel." His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "I argued against it." Naomi turned from the window slowly. "But you stayed in the room." Another silence. Somewhere through the phone she heard muffled ballroom music and distant applause. Daniel lowered his voice further. "You need to understand how the board thinks." "No," Naomi replied calmly. "I understand exactly how they think." Her reflection stared back at her from the dark glass nearby. Perfect posture. Controlled face. A black woman who had spent half her life learning how to sound non-threatening in rooms full of people waiting for her to become angry enough to dismiss. Daniel spoke again carefully. "If this turns public, the company could lose everything." Naomi looked down at the USB drive resting beside the laptop. Tiny. Silent. Dangerous. Interesting, she said softly. Because nobody seemed worried about losing everything when they were taking it from me. Daniel inhaled sharply. Naomi. Did you know they were collecting investor preference reports based on race? Silence answered before he did. And that silence told her more than any confession could. Naomi felt something inside her settle completely then. A painful kind of clarity. Daniel finally spoke. Please do not destroy your career over this. Naomi almost smiled at that. Destroy your career. As if they had not already tried. She walked back toward the conference table slowly, fingertips brushing against the cool leather portfolio containing the speech she never gave. Good night, Daniel. Naomi, wait. She ended the call softly. No anger. No yelling. Just silence. Then she looked back toward the laptop screen where the paused audio file still waited beneath the glow of city lights. Outside, the storm thickened over Manhattan. Inside the executive lounge, Naomi Carter finally understood something terrifying. The board had never underestimated her intelligence. They underestimated her willingness to stay quiet. The ballroom sounded different when Naomi returned. Louder now. Looser. The kind of confidence powerful people carried once they believed the outcome was secured. Laughter rolled beneath the chandeliers in warm polished waves while servers refreshed wine glasses and investors leaned closer around candlelit tables discussing future growth projections, as though history had already been rewritten successfully. Naomi stepped through the side entrance quietly, her leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm, her expression unreadable. Nobody noticed immediately. Ethan was still on stage speaking beneath the glow of giant digital screens displaying quarterly performance charts Naomi herself had designed 6 months earlier. The next era of Whitmore and Vale, Ethan announced smoothly, will prioritize trust, innovation, and transparency. Naomi almost stopped walking at the word transparency. Instead, she continued toward the rear aisle between tables while soft jazz drifted through the ballroom speakers again. Somewhere nearby, a waiter uncorked another bottle of champagne with a muted pop. Tiny sounds suddenly felt unnaturally sharp tonight. Naomi reached the back corner near table 38 and paused. Her untouched water glass still sat exactly where she left it, condensation sliding slowly down the side beneath the ballroom lights. Everything looked normal. Perfectly normal. That was the terrifying part. Entire lives could be dismantled in rooms like this while linen napkins remained folded perfectly beside silverware. A voice interrupted quietly behind her. I was hoping you left. Naomi turned. Ethan Whitmore stood there holding a crystal tumbler filled with amber whiskey. Up close he looked slightly less polished than he had on stage. Tension lived beneath the smile now. Tiny cracks beginning to show around the eyes. You should not sneak up on people, Naomi said calmly. Ethan gave a soft laugh that never reached his eyes. You disappeared for almost 40 minutes. Did that worry you? He took a slow sip from the glass before answering. It depends what you found during those 40 minutes. There it was. Not denial. Not confusion. Fear carefully disguised as confidence. Naomi studied him silently for a moment while conversations hummed around them. Investors nearby kept laughing. Glasses kept clinking. Nobody noticed the war happening quietly in the back corner of the ballroom. Ethan lowered his voice slightly. Margaret says you are upset. Naomi glanced toward the stage where giant screens still displayed his smiling photograph beside the company logo. Upset is a small word. Ethan inhaled slowly through his nose. This decision was not personal. Naomi finally looked directly at him then. You took my position using investor reports that evaluated leadership based on race. Ethan's jaw tightened almost invisibly. You do not understand how these people think. Naomi stared at him. No. I understand exactly how they think. What I am trying to understand is how you sleep afterward. For the first time since approaching her, Ethan lost control of his expression completely. Just for a second, shame flickered there. Quick. Human. Then gone again beneath executive composure. He lowered his whiskey glass carefully onto a nearby cocktail table. You think I wanted this? Naomi said nothing. Ethan stepped closer, voice dropping further. The board was already moving against you months ago. Margaret convinced investors you were too risky for the market. Right now. Naomi folded her arms slowly. And you volunteered to save them from me. Ethan looked exhausted suddenly, older somehow beneath the ballroom lights. You know what Wall Street is like. Do not insult me by pretending this was strategy. His silence answered louder than words. Naomi watched him carefully. For years she had believed Ethan was simply ambitious. Tonight she finally saw something smaller beneath it. Fear. Fear of losing approval. Fear of challenging rooms full of wealthy white men who decided who looked safe enough to lead. Ethan rubbed his jaw once before speaking again. If this becomes public, shareholders will panic. Naomi almost smiled at the shift in language. Not if this is false. This becomes public. Interesting, she said softly. You still think protecting the company matters more to me than protecting myself. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, then drifted toward the leather portfolio beneath her arm. What exactly do you have in there? Naomi looked down at the portfolio briefly before meeting his eyes again. Enough to make tonight very expensive for everyone in this room. Somewhere near the stage, applause suddenly erupted again as Margaret Hale rose to begin the formal CEO induction ceremony. Ethan looked toward the front of the ballroom instinctively. Naomi watched the movement carefully. Watched the panic beginning to form beneath his polished exterior. Then softly, almost sadly, she said the one thing he clearly never expected to hear from her. You should have let me walk away with dignity. Margaret Hale's voice rolled smoothly across the ballroom through hidden ceiling speakers while guests settled back into their seats beneath the gold chandelier light. Leadership, she said warmly from the stage, requires difficult decisions, clear vision, and the courage to guide organizations into the future. Naomi stood near the back of the ballroom beside Ethan Whitmore, watching applause ripple through the crowd like practice choreography. Ethan had gone silent after her last sentence. His jaw remained tight, his eyes fixed toward the stage where Margaret now smiled beside the giant LED screen displaying his portrait in silver and blue. Naomi could almost see the calculations moving behind his eyes. Damage control. Investor reaction. Legal exposure. Fear disguised as professionalism. Margaret continued speaking. Tonight marks not only a transition in leadership, but a renewal of trust in the future of Whitmore and Vale. Naomi glanced around the room slowly. So many polished faces. Board members nodding solemnly. Financial reporters typing notes into tablets. Wealthy investors swirling wine inside crystal glasses, while pretending they had earned moral authority simply because they owned stock. And still not one person had approached her tonight to ask if she was all right. Ethan finally spoke without looking at her. There is still time to handle this privately. Naomi almost smiled at the wording. Privately. Quietly. Conveniently. You mean invisibly. Ethan rubbed one hand across his mouth briefly. You know how ugly this could become. Naomi turned toward him fully now. No, Ethan. I know how ugly it already is. Before he could answer, a young event assistant hurried toward them carrying a wireless microphone with nervous hands. Mr. Whitmore, she said breathlessly, Miss Hale wants you on stage now for the induction presentation. Ethan looked at Naomi one last time. Not angry anymore. Almost pleading. Please think carefully before you do anything. Naomi held his gaze calmly. That would have mattered more before tonight. Ethan said nothing after that. He adjusted his tuxedo jacket automatically. The reflex of a man trained his entire life to recover appearances no matter what collapsed underneath them. Then he walked toward the stage while applause rose again around the ballroom. Naomi remained still near the back wall. Watching. Listening. Waiting. The giant LED screen shifted behind Margaret, displaying photographs from Ethan's career. Handshakes with senators. Magazine covers. Charity fundraisers. Smiling interviews beneath bright studio lights. Public confidence packaged into moving images. Naomi noticed something strange then. Not one photograph showed the actual people who built the company's survival systems during the recession. No warehouse workers. No operations teams. No overnight finance staff sleeping beside spreadsheets and broken forecasts, while the company bled millions every week. Certainly not Naomi Carter. Ladies and gentlemen, Margaret announced proudly, our new chief executive officer. The ballroom erupted into applause as Ethan stepped onto the stage beneath the moving lights. Camera flashes burst white across the room. Naomi watched him pause at the podium, both hands resting lightly against polished black wood while investors smiled up at him expectantly. Somewhere deep inside herself, Naomi felt an old memory rise unexpectedly. Her father sitting beside her at the kitchen table when she was 12 years old in Newark. Rain hitting apartment windows while overdue bills sat stacked beside a cold cup of coffee. "You are going to walk into rooms someday," he told her quietly back then, "where people decide who belongs before you even speak. Do not let their comfort become your silence." Naomi swallowed slowly. She had spent years trying to survive those rooms gracefully. Tonight's survival no longer seemed enough. Ethan began speaking into the microphone. "I am honored by the board's confidence." The ballroom doors behind Naomi suddenly opened again with a soft metallic click. She turned instinctively. Daniel Brooks stood there near the entrance breathing heavily like he had rushed across the hotel to find her. His gray suit looked slightly disheveled now, tie loosened, forehead damp beneath the ballroom lights. For a moment he simply stared at her across the crowded room. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, he lifted a second USB drive into view between trembling fingers. Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly. Daniel stepped closer through the crowd and lowered his voice once he reached her side. "The files you found are not the worst part." Naomi felt the room shift around her again. Tiny movements. Tiny sounds. Ice clinking inside glasses. Camera shutters clicking near the stage. Ethan's polished voice continuing overhead. Daniel's face looked pale beneath the chandelier glow. "There is another recording," he whispered. "One Margaret never intended anyone to hear." Naomi stared at the second USB drive. In Daniel Brooks's trembling hand while Ethan's voice continued rolling across the ballroom from the stage above them. "Our mission moving forward," Ethan declared confidently into the microphone, "is to build a culture rooted in fairness, opportunity, and trust." The irony almost felt unreal now. Around them, guests applauded politely between bites of filet mignon and sips of expensive wine, completely unaware that the foundation beneath the evening was beginning to crack. Daniel glanced nervously toward the stage before lowering his voice further. "We cannot stand here." Naomi studied his face carefully. For the first time in 12 years, Daniel Brooks looked afraid of the company he helped build. "Then walk," she said quietly. They moved through the ballroom side aisle together beneath soft gold lighting, while servers brushed past carrying silver trays of desserts untouched by most guests. Nobody stopped them. Nobody even noticed. Powerful people rarely looked toward the edges of rooms unless someone important called attention there first. Daniel pushed open the side corridor door, and the sound of the ballroom softened instantly behind them. The hallway beyond felt dim and strangely empty compared to the polished celebration only feet away. Naomi folded her arms slowly. "Talk." Daniel loosened his tie with shaky fingers. "The board did not just replace you because of investor pressure." Naomi said nothing. He looked down at the USB drive in his palm before continuing. 6 months ago, Margaret hired a private consulting firm to conduct executive perception analysis. Naomi almost smiled coldly. Corporate language for racial profiling. Daniel winced slightly at the directness of it. They interviewed institutional investors anonymously, pension groups, venture partners, international stakeholders. And Daniel swallowed hard. "One investor literally described you as impressive, but difficult to market to traditional leadership demographics." Naomi looked at him without expression. "Traditional?" Daniel nodded once. Another said the company needed someone who looked more reassuring during economic uncertainty. Silence settled heavily between them. Somewhere down the hallway an ice machine hummed softly behind a service door while rain tapped lightly against distant hotel windows. Naomi had spent her entire adult life decoding language exactly like this. Reassuring. Professional. Polished. Executive presence. Words carefully designed to avoid saying black woman out loud while meaning it every time. Daniel finally handed her the second USB drive. The recording on there was from a private strategy dinner at Margaret's penthouse 3 weeks ago. Naomi took it slowly. Who else was there? Margaret. Ethan. 2 major investors. Daniel's voice lowered almost to a whisper. And me. Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly. You recorded your own board? He looked ashamed. At first I thought I needed protection. His jaw tightened. Then I realized maybe someone else did. Naomi studied him silently while the distant ballroom applause echoed faintly through the walls again. Daniel looked exhausted now. Like guilt had been eating through him one sleepless night at a time. Why now? She asked quietly. Because I watched you save this company over and over again, while they smiled in your face and planned this behind your back. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face briefly before continuing. Do you remember the warehouse collapse in Cleveland 2 winters ago? Naomi nodded immediately. 3 employees trapped overnight during a blizzard after structural damage hit the loading dock. She had personally coordinated emergency operations until sunrise. Margaret told investors afterward that your response was too emotional. Naomi blinked once. Daniel laughed bitterly under his breath. Too emotional because you cried after finding out all 3 workers survived. Naomi looked away toward the dark hallway windows. Rainwater streaked silver beneath city lights outside. Her father's voice echoed faintly in memory again. Do not let their comfort become your silence. Daniel spoke carefully now. I know you are angry. Naomi turned back toward him slowly. No, her voice remained calm. Angry would imply surprise. Daniel fell silent. From somewhere deeper inside the ballroom came another burst of applause followed by Ethan, thanking the board publicly for their confidence. Naomi glanced toward the closed hallway doors separating them from the celebration. What happens if this recording gets out? She asked. Daniel answered honestly this time. The stock price drops tomorrow morning. And after that? He hesitated. Federal investigations probably begin within days. Naomi looked down at the second USB drive resting in her palm. Such tiny objects. So small. Yet capable of collapsing careers, reputations, entire systems built on polished lies. Daniel exhaled slowly. You still have time to walk away from this. Naomi lifted her eyes toward him again. Calm. Steady. Unshaken now. That option disappeared the moment they decided my skin made me bad for business. Then, before Daniel could respond, the ballroom doors behind them suddenly opened. Margaret Hale herself stepped into the hallway beneath the soft gold light, her pearl-white suit immaculate, her expression composed, and her eyes immediately locking onto the USB drive in Naomi's hand. Margaret Hale stopped 3 feet away from them, perfectly composed beneath the warm hallway lighting. Not a strand of silver hair out of place. Not a wrinkle visible in the pearl-white fabric of her suit. Even now, with the air between them tightening by the second, she looked like the human version of corporate stability. Calm. Expensive. Untouchable. But Naomi noticed the detail most people would miss. Margaret's eyes had gone straight to the USB drive in her hand before anything else. Not to Naomi's face. Not to Daniel. The drive. Fear always revealed itself in tiny places first. There you are, Margaret said smoothly, as if she had merely been searching for a delayed dinner guest. People are beginning to notice your absence. Naomi held her gaze without speaking. Daniel shifted awkwardly beside them, suddenly looking much smaller than either woman standing in front of him. Margaret smiled faintly toward him. Daniel, the investors from Chicago are asking for you at table 6. Daniel swallowed once but did not move. The smallest flicker of irritation crossed Margaret's face before disappearing again. I think, Naomi said quietly. He is exactly where he needs to be. Silence settled heavily down the corridor. Somewhere inside the ballroom, Ethan's amplified voice continued through the speakers while silverware clinked softly against plates. Margaret folded her hands together calmly. Naomi, whatever misunderstanding happened tonight, I would prefer we handle it professionally. Naomi almost admired how easily the woman could weaponize the word professionally. Professionally, Naomi repeated softly. Is that what we are calling it now? Margaret's expression cooled slightly. You are upset. You keep using that word. Because emotions are high. Naomi stared at her steadily. No. Emotions are controlled. That is why your board survived this long. Daniel looked down at the carpet immediately after she said it. Margaret noticed. Of course she noticed. Women like Margaret noticed everything. Daniel, she said carefully, would you give us a moment alone? Daniel finally lifted his eyes. For a second Naomi thought he might obey automatically out of habit. Years of boardrooms and hierarchy pressing down on instinct. But then he looked at Naomi instead. No, he said quietly. Margaret's face changed almost imperceptibly. Not anger. Worse. Disappointment. The kind powerful people reserved for subordinates forgetting their place. I see, she said softly. Naomi watched the mask slipping now. Tiny fractures beneath perfect control. Margaret took one slow step closer. Naomi, you have had an extraordinary career here. Naomi let out the faintest breath through her nose. Extraordinary career. Past tense already. You built divisions most executives could not manage in a lifetime. Margaret's voice remained smooth and measured. But leadership at this level involves realities beyond personal achievement. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Go on. Margaret hesitated for half a second, long enough to realize she had stepped onto dangerous ground. Public companies answer to perception whether we like it or not. There it was again. Perception. The elegant corporate ghost haunting every conversation tonight. Naomi looked down briefly at the USB drive resting against her palm, then back at Margaret. You mean race? The hallway went completely still. Even Daniel stopped breathing for a moment. Margaret's eyes hardened slightly. I mean investor confidence. No, Naomi said calmly. You mean race. You just prefer language that photographs better in annual reports. Margaret's jaw tightened. The first genuine crack Naomi had seen all evening. Be careful, Naomi. I was careful for 11 years. Her voice never rose. That made it worse somehow. Careful when clients mistook me for administrative staff. Careful when investors praised me for being articulate like it surprised them. Careful when board members asked whether I was too aggressive after meetings where Ethan yelled loud enough to shake the walls. Daniel closed his eyes briefly beside them. Margaret inhaled slowly through her nose. Nobody denied your talent. Naomi gave a quiet, humorless laugh. No. You simply denied what came with it. A burst of applause exploded suddenly from the ballroom as Ethan apparently finished another section of his speech. The sound echoed faintly through the hallway walls before fading again. Margaret lowered her voice. If you release anything damaging tonight, the company suffers first. Thousands of employees depend on this business. Naomi looked at her carefully then. Really carefully. And for the first time all evening she understood something important. Margaret Hale truly believed she was protecting the company. Not because she hated Naomi personally. Worse, because she believed preserving power justified almost anything. Naomi spoke softly now. Do you know the saddest part? Margaret said nothing. After everything tonight, Naomi continued, I still would have protected this company if you had simply told the truth. Margaret's expression flickered. Tiny. Human. Gone again almost immediately. Then her eyes dropped once more toward the USB drive in Naomi's hand. And that was when Naomi finally realized Margaret did not know which recording she had. Margaret Hale recovered faster than most people would have. That was what made her dangerous. The flicker of uncertainty vanished from her face almost instantly, replaced again by polished executive calm beneath the soft hallway lighting. Naomi, she said carefully, you are too intelligent to turn this into a spectacle. Naomi studied her silently. Somewhere beyond the closed ballroom doors, Ethan continued speaking while investors laughed softly at something he said into the microphone. The celebration sounded distant now. Artificial. Like a recording playing in another building entirely. Margaret folded her hands in front of her. Whatever you think is on those drives, there are ways to resolve this quietly. Daniel shifted beside Naomi, his face tightening at the word quietly. Naomi noticed. Margaret noticed too. Daniel, Margaret said smoothly, you look exhausted. He did not answer. Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. You have always been emotional under pressure. Naomi almost smiled at the irony of hearing Margaret weaponize the same word against a white man now. Daniel finally spoke, his voice rougher than before. You told investors she would never feel familiar enough to lead. Margaret's expression did not change, but the silence afterward felt heavier somehow. Daniel took another breath. You said the market trusts faces it recognizes. That conversation was confidential, Margaret replied sharply. No, Naomi said softly. It was revealing. Margaret turned back toward Naomi fully. You think corporations run on morality? Naomi did not blink. No. I think people hide behind corporations to avoid morality. For the first time all night, Margaret looked tired. Not old exactly. Just tired in the way powerful people looked when their certainty began cracking underneath them. Do you know how many companies collapse because leaders ignore investor psychology? She asked quietly. Do you know how many black executives never even get the chance to fail publicly because someone decides they look wrong for the room first? Naomi answered immediately. The hallway fell silent again. Rain tapped faintly against distant hotel glass while warm light reflected off polished brass wall fixtures beside them. Margaret exhaled slowly. You built this company into something extraordinary. Naomi said nothing. But there are realities you still refuse to accept. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Such as? Margaret held her gaze. People trust what feels familiar during instability. Naomi almost laughed then. Not loudly. Just once beneath her breath. Because there it was. The truth finally standing in the open without corporate decoration around it. Familiar. Safe. Reassuring. White. Daniel looked sick now. Margaret. She ignored him completely. Her focus stayed fixed on Naomi. I did what I believed protected this company. Naomi stared at her for several long seconds before speaking. And if I looked different? Margaret hesitated. Tiny. Barely visible. But enough. Naomi nodded slowly. Exactly. Suddenly the ballroom doors opened behind them again and bright applause flooded into the hallway. Ethan Whitmore stepped through beneath the spill of chandelier light, his expression tightening instantly when he saw the three of them standing together. A production assistant hurried after him carrying cue cards and a tablet. Mr. Whitmore, she said nervously, the investors from Blackstone are asking whether Miss Carter will join the final leadership presentation. Ethan looked like he wanted the floor beneath him to split open. Margaret answered before he could. Miss Carter will not be participating further tonight. Naomi calmly reached into her leather portfolio then. Every person in the hallway went still watching her hand move. Slowly, deliberately, she removed a slim black remote control attached to the ballroom presentation system. Ethan's face lost color immediately. Naomi, he said quietly, do not do this here. Naomi looked toward the ballroom entrance where hundreds of guests sat beneath glowing chandeliers believing they were attending a celebration instead of witnessing a lie polished into ceremony. She thought about every meeting where she had smiled carefully to avoid appearing intimidating. Every late night spent saving divisions other executives nearly destroyed. Every investor who praised her intelligence like it surprised them. Then she looked back at Ethan. You already did this here. Before anyone could move, Naomi pressed the remote button once. Inside the ballroom, the giant LED screen suddenly flickered black. Behind the stage, Ethan closed his eyes briefly like a man hearing disaster arrive before impact. A second later, Margaret's recorded voice thundered through the ballroom speakers loud enough to shake the hallway walls. Investors are more comfortable with someone who looks like traditional leadership. Silence crashed through the entire hotel almost instantly. The silence inside the ballroom did not happen all at once. It spread slowly, table by table, like cold water moving across glass. First came confusion, then the sound of silverware lowering onto plates, then chairs creaking softly as people turned toward the giant LED screens now frozen black behind the stage. Margaret Hale's recorded voice echoed through the speakers again, impossibly clear beneath the chandeliers. Investors are more comfortable with someone who looks like traditional leadership. Ethan Whitmore stood center stage, gripping the podium so tightly his knuckles had gone pale beneath the spotlight. The confidence he wore all evening shattered in seconds. Camera flashes stopped. Reporters lowered tablets halfway through typing. Even the servers carrying champagne trays stood motionless near the ballroom walls. Naomi stepped slowly through the entrance beside Daniel and Margaret. Hundreds of faces turned toward her immediately. Some shocked, some horrified, some already calculating legal fallout before the night was even over. The recording continued. Naomi Carter is exceptional internally, Margaret's voice said through the ballroom speakers. But markets respond emotionally during instability. A low murmur rippled across the room. Naomi walked forward calmly down the center aisle between tables while every eye followed her movement now. Her heels tapped softly against polished marble floors beneath the chandelier glow. No rushing. No anger. Just quiet certainty. Ethan finally found his voice. Turn it off, he said sharply toward the audio technician near the stage. The technician froze helplessly. I cannot. It is synced directly into the presentation server. Another voice filled the ballroom speakers then. Daniel's recorded voice. Uneasy. Smaller. She built this company. Silence. Again. Then Margaret's response came cold and measured enough to make several guests visibly shift in their seats. That does not mean she photographs as leadership during economic uncertainty. A woman near the front table covered her mouth slowly. Someone else whispered, Jesus Christ. Naomi kept walking toward the stage while rain streaked the ballroom windows behind her in silver lines beneath Manhattan lights. Ethan stepped back from the podium now, eyes fixed on her like he no longer recognized the evening around him. Naomi, he said quietly into the microphone. Please. She stopped only a few feet below the stage. Above her the giant LED screens flickered again, and another document suddenly appeared across them in massive white letters. Executive Optics Evaluation Report. Recommended Leadership Profile. Male white. Legacy traditional presentation preferred for investor stability. Audible gasp spread through the ballroom this time. No more confusion now. Only truth standing naked beneath expensive lighting. Margaret stepped forward immediately, voice firm. These materials were confidential strategic discussions taken out of context. Naomi finally spoke for the first time since entering the ballroom. Calm. Clear. What context makes racism acceptable in a boardroom? Nobody answered. Ethan looked physically smaller now, standing beneath the giant screens displaying the documents. One reporter near the front suddenly raised a phone and started recording openly. Then another. Then another. Margaret saw it happening and her composure cracked completely for the first time all night. Put those devices down immediately, she snapped. But nobody listened anymore. Because power only sounded absolute until fear entered the room. Daniel slowly stepped beside Naomi near the front aisle. His face looked pale beneath the lights, but his voice held steady now. The recordings are authentic, he said loudly enough for the room to hear. Every head turned toward him instantly. Ethan closed his eyes briefly like a man hearing his career collapse one sentence at a time. Daniel continued anyway. The board knowingly evaluated executive leadership based on racial perception data and investor comfort metrics tied directly to Naomi Carter's identity. The ballroom erupted into overlapping voices all at once. Investors shouting questions. Reporters standing. Phones ringing. One board member near the center table looked like he might faint. Through all the chaos, Naomi remained completely still. Watching. Breathing slowly. Feeling 11 years of silence finally break open around her. Ethan stepped down from the stage then, moving toward Naomi carefully while the room spiraled behind them. I am sorry, he said quietly enough that only she could hear. Naomi looked at him for several long seconds. He meant it. That was the tragic part. Too late. But real. You were not supposed to become the villain, she said softly. Ethan swallowed hard. Neither were you. Naomi glanced around the ballroom one final time. At the frightened executives. At the reporters already sending headlines into the world. At Margaret Hale standing frozen beneath the giant screens displaying her own words back to her. Then Naomi looked toward the stage where her stolen future had been celebrated less than an hour earlier. And for the first time all night, nobody questioned whether she belonged there. The ballroom no longer sounded like a celebration. It sounded like collapse wrapped in expensive fabric. Voices overlapped from every direction beneath the chandeliers while reporters pushed closer toward the stage holding glowing phones and half-finished notes. Investors whispered furiously around candlelit tables. Some board members avoided eye contact completely while others argued in tight angry circles near the back wall. The giant LED screen still displayed the executive evaluation report in towering white letters above the room like a confession nobody could erase fast enough. Naomi stood near the front aisle watching it all unfold with an almost surreal calm settling over her shoulders. After 11 years inside corporate warfare, she knew something most people never learned. The loudest moment was never the real breaking point. The real breaking point came afterward. In silence. In boardrooms. In legal calls at 3 in the morning when powerful People realized their names might finally carry consequences. Ethan Whitmore remained only a few feet away from her near the stage stairs, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned now, his polished confidence stripped down to exhaustion. Margaret Hale stood farther back surrounded by attorneys and board members speaking in urgent whispers, while one public relations executive looked seconds away from a panic attack. "Ladies and gentlemen," one investor suddenly shouted toward the stage, "is this company under federal investigation now or not?" No one answered immediately. The silence that followed felt heavier than the shouting before it. Naomi watched Margaret carefully. Even now, the woman was calculating survival angles, press strategy, damage containment, shareholder confidence, never once humanity. Daniel stepped onto the stage slowly then, microphone trembling slightly in his hand. The ballroom quieted inch by inch watching him. "The board will be holding an emergency executive session tonight," he announced carefully. "Further comments will be released after legal review." Reporters exploded with questions instantly. Did executives knowingly discriminate during the CEO selection? Were investors consulted based on race? Did Whitmore participate knowingly? Ethan closed his eyes briefly at the last question. Naomi saw it clearly now. The shame. Not because he had been caught. Because somewhere deep down he already knew he had traded his integrity for approval from people who would never truly respect him either. A young female reporter near the front suddenly turned toward Naomi directly. "Miss Carter," she asked loudly, "are you planning legal action against the company?" Hundreds of eyes shifted toward Naomi again all at once. The room went still waiting for her answer. Naomi looked around the ballroom slowly before speaking. At the frightened analysts near the back wall. At the waiters frozen beside silver trays. At junior employees who looked devastated watching people they once admired unravel publicly beneath chandelier light. Then she looked at the giant screens displaying the words that nearly erased her tonight. "I did not expose this company because I wanted revenge," she said calmly. Her voice carried farther than she expected through the silent room. "I exposed it because systems like this survive when people confuse silence with professionalism." Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Naomi continued softly. "For years I believed if I worked harder, stayed calmer, smiled more carefully, eventually I would be allowed to belong in rooms like this without conditions attached." Her eyes drifted briefly toward Margaret Hale. "I was wrong." Margaret looked away first. Naomi took one slow breath. "But this is bigger than one promotion. Bigger than one board." The room remained completely still now except for rain tapping lightly against the towering ballroom windows overlooking Manhattan. Every person in this building deserves to know whether leadership decisions are based on merit or fear. Somewhere behind Naomi, a champagne glass shattered quietly against the floor after slipping from someone's hand. Nobody even turned toward the sound. The room belonged entirely to her now. Ethan finally stepped beside her near the stage. His voice sounded rough when he spoke into the microphone. "The recordings are real." Audible gasps spread again across the ballroom. Margaret's attorneys immediately started moving toward him, but Ethan kept talking anyway. "And I accepted a position I knew should have belonged to someone else." Naomi looked at him sharply, surprised. Ethan swallowed hard beneath the lights. "I told myself I was protecting the company." His eyes lowered briefly. "The truth is I was protecting myself." No applause followed. No dramatic reaction. Just silence. Honest silence for the first time all evening. Naomi looked out across the ballroom once more. At all the people staring back at her now, not with pity or discomfort or polite corporate tolerance, but with recognition. And somehow that felt heavier than anger ever could. Then slowly, deliberately, Naomi stepped onto the stage they tried so hard to keep her away from. 6 months later, the old Whitmore and Vale headquarters looked different without the giant banners hanging across the glass tower. Different without photographers waiting near the revolving doors every morning hoping to catch executives pretending nothing had happened. The lawsuits came first. Then the resignations. Then the investigations investors once thought impossible. Financial news channels spent weeks dissecting leaked recordings and board emails while analysts debated whether the company could ever recover its reputation completely. Margaret Hale retired quietly 3 weeks after the scandal broke. Ethan Whitmore resigned 2 days later. His final public statement was only 3 sentences long. He admitted failure, accepted responsibility, asked employees for forgiveness. Naomi read the statement once from her kitchen counter early one rainy morning while coffee steamed beside her laptop. Then she closed the article and moved on with her day. Because some endings stopped belonging to you once the truth finally reached daylight. Across downtown Manhattan, inside a renovated brick building overlooking the Hudson River, soft sunlight spilled across polished oak floors and unfinished walls still smelling faintly of fresh paint. Workers moved through the open office space carrying monitors and potted plants while quiet music drifted from hidden ceiling speakers. Near the far window, Naomi Carter stood alone adjusting framed mission statements beside the entrance lobby. No marble floors. No giant chandeliers. No executive portraits staring down from walls. Just warm light, exposed brick, long tables built for collaboration instead of hierarchy, and a small brass plaque beside the reception desk that read Carter Strategic Group. Her own company. Her own name. No board approval required. Naomi stepped back slightly, studying the room while morning sunlight reflected softly against the glass windows overlooking the river. The office was still mostly empty this early. Calm. Honest. The way beginnings were supposed to feel. Her phone buzzed lightly against the reception desk. Olivia. Naomi smiled before answering. Please tell me you finally ate breakfast. Olivia laughed softly through the speaker. Mom, you are opening a company in 30 minutes and somehow you are still worried about waffles. Naomi glanced toward the half-finished coffee cooling beside her laptop. That means yes, you skipped breakfast. Maybe. Naomi shook her head with quiet amusement while workers continued arranging chairs farther down the office hallway. You coming tonight? Olivia asked. For the dinner? Naomi looked toward the large conference room windows where sunlight stretched across empty leather chairs. I will try. Olivia's voice softened slightly. You know Grandma would have been proud today. Naomi went still for half a second at that. Her mother spent years cleaning office buildings in Newark, while telling Naomi never to let bitterness become her personality. Work hard. Stay kind. Leave rooms better than you found them. Naomi swallowed gently. I know. After the call ended, silence settled softly around the office again. Peaceful silence this time. Not the suffocating kind from corporate boardrooms where people swallowed truth to survive another quarter. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Naomi turned. Daniel Brooks stood quietly near the entrance holding a cardboard box and looking strangely uncertain without a tailored executive team surrounding him. The old anxiety from the ballroom months ago was gone now. He simply looked tired. Human. You are early, Naomi said calmly. Daniel gave a small nervous smile. I figured after 12 years of being late morally, I should at least arrive on time physically. Naomi almost laughed softly at that. Daniel stepped farther inside the office, looking around at the unfinished walls and open sunlight. This place feels different. Naomi nodded once. That is the point. Daniel looked down at the cardboard box in his hands before offering it toward her. Your old office nameplate. Naomi stared at the brushed silver plaque resting inside the box. Chief Operating Officer. Whitmore and Vale Holdings. Once she thought seeing those words disappear would destroy her. Now they just looked heavy, like something built for someone else's approval. Naomi gently closed the box again without taking the plaque out. Keep it, she said softly. Daniel blinked. You do not want it? Naomi looked around the office one more time. At the sunlight, the quiet, the people beginning to arrive. Carrying coffee and laptops and possibilities nobody needed permission to deserve. Then she smiled faintly for the first time in a long while. No, she said. I finally realized I was never fighting for a chair. Outside the windows, morning light stretched slowly across the Hudson while the city beyond kept moving exactly as it always had. Loud, restless, imperfect. But inside the small office by the river, Naomi Carter stood surrounded not by power, but by something far rarer. Peace.